Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed. I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a company that works with management consulting and boutique consulting firms from around the world to help them increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Eileen McDargh. She is the CEO and founder of the consulting firm McDargh Communications and the Resiliency Group. British research firm known as Global Gurus, which annually surveys some of 20,000 businesses, has consistently rated Eileen among the top 5 people in communications category. She's an author of 8 books, and her book Gifts from the Mountain won the Ben Franklin Gold Award. Since 1980, she's been helping organizations and individuals transform the life of their business and the business of their life through conversations that matter and connections that count. She believes in resiliency is a critical life skill and one that requires energy and connections. She draws upon practical business know-how, life experiences, and years of consulting to major national and international organizations that have ranged from global pharmaceuticals to US Armed Forces, the healthcare associations to religious institutions. Her programs are content-rich, interactive, proactive, and playful. Today we're going to be talking about collaborative communication and team development. Eileen, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Saeed. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and really looking forward to getting the insights that you have and being able to share all the things that you've been able to share from your illustrious career. I guess best way to start for our viewers and listeners out there is, could you, and I've probably butchered your background, but could you give a brief background on the journey that you've had to where you are now and the current role you play within your business?
So long ago and far away, I worked as an educator in a rural community school at the Florida-Georgia border. I taught English, which was really interesting if you were in a rural community at the Florida-Georgia border. I did that for 3.5 years. I did not have a teaching credential. I got it doing it, and I loved it. And I ended up at the end of 4 years the teacher of the year for my county. I left that, came out to California. I worked in corporate communications for a national healthcare company, and then went with a public relations firm and handling primarily their multinational clients in the area of communications. And I got to the place, Saeed, where if I wrote another press release, I was going to throw up. Therefore, I decided I want to start my own company. I want to have some control over my life. And that's where I started McDargh Communications and subsequently the Resiliency Group, which I became really interested in when 9/11 hit the United States. And I watched my fellow citizens. How do you recover, which for us in the States was the largest thing we had experienced. And in the course of that time, I have studied this. I'm constantly learning. I think that's one of the great things about being in our business is if you think you know it all, you just lost. You have to keep learning. And so that's kind of been the journey. My first book was called The Resilient Spirit, which I wrote following 9/11. And then the subsequent books have been, as you mentioned, The Gifts from the Mountain. Mm-hmm. And my most recent one is Burnout to Breakthrough, Building Resilience to Refuel, Recharge, and Reclaim What Matters. And last year it was selected as one of the top 10 books in that area of burnout by a national healthcare organization. So that's kind of my journey. I do a lot of public speaking. I do now coming from the pandemic, I do virtual presentations, which actually is great because I can keep on my bunny slippers.
Yeah. Is that adage of wearing a nice suit and tie, but just in your boxers, right? No, absolutely love that. And I think I've seen some of your public speaking stuff as well. And when looking into you, and it's some of the topics you speak about, especially one of the key aspects is speaking to a crowd and having good communication skills, and collaborative communication is something that you speak about a lot. How do you define effective collaborative communication?
It's an interesting question. Let's first talk about this idea of collaborative communication, because what it really implies is that you're not the one who does all the talking. You do a lot of listening. And I think we forget, as the Irish have a saying, the good Lord gave us 2 ears and a mouth, which should imply that we're supposed to listen twice as much as we speak, but we don't. And so what I see oftentimes in organizations, someone talks and the person over here is trying to figure out, what's my response? How do I get back? What do I say? Instead of really sitting there and taking in and listening. And I think this idea of collaborative communication is all about connection. Vivek Murthy, who's our current Surgeon General in the United States, wrote a book and he was saying that the greatest pandemic that we have is loneliness. People feel disconnected. And you look at this side, what happens in organizations, people are there, but they're disconnected. Their bodies are present, their minds and their hearts are not. And how do we get those back? Is we begin to have this ability to really listen to each other and find what we have in common.
I think that's a really great point, and I think since the pandemic, the effects of that has got far more prevalent, I think, in terms of people not being in the office as much, people being just behind a desk or just behind a laptop and not actually necessarily being in that collaborative space. And I think you mentioned a great point about actually having two ears and one mouth means that you should really be listening more than you should be speaking. And it's that concept of active listening, right? And actually being there. And it's every aspect of business comes down to understanding the other person, right? And you can talk the hind legs of a horse, but when it comes to actually being able to convince someone, influence someone, or even understand someone, you need to first be able to empathize with someone and listen to what they're actually saying. So I think it's a really great points you mentioned there. In terms of, I guess, the biggest trends that you're seeing, and obviously you've had great experience in speaking to businesses and large crowds and public speaking. What are the biggest current trends in the market that you're seeing, that you're aware of? What way is the wind blowing?
Now, is this, Saeed, in reference to speaking before an audience or looking for trends or topics?
Yeah.
Well, first off, I think it's been reduced. And part of it is the cost of holding conferences.
Mm-hmm.
The cost has gone up exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
Air travel, if you have to travel to a place, you have the hotel, you have all those things. I think one of the trends is that we don't see as many gatherings as we used to. At least that's in my experience. Which in a way is really sad because, again, how do we create those connections? It's one thing for you and I to talk here, but it'd be another thing if I was sitting across the table from you and having a cup of tea. And it would be different. So I think that hopefully that will change. The wind is blowing right now in strange places. So if I had to tell you what's the trend, is that there's no solid trend.
Sure. I think that's another really interesting point you mentioned there, especially when you're speaking in events that require a lot of people and communities of people coming in to see and learn something. It requires a lot more nowadays than it once maybe probably did. In terms of then the trends with regards to corporate speaking, in terms of the communication side of things, and how is that looking in terms of the future, do you think?
Again, I wish I was a fortune teller. I'm not.
Yeah.
I wish I had a fortune because I was a teller. No, I don't. Actually, what I just said right now, and you and I both laughed, I think that's one of the things we've forgotten in communication, is that laughter is the shortest distance between two people. If you and I could laugh, we set up right away. There was something in common that we shared. Mm-hmm. And as I say that, it's one thing when you're in front of a group and someone laughs, it ripples. It's another thing when you're doing things virtually. And so what I think is that we will see more virtual meetings. But you can have good virtual meetings that brings people together, where they don't hide behind, turn the camera off, don't let me look at you, okay, so I have on my bunny slippers. It doesn't matter. I really think there is a skill to doing virtual meetings. And you can also, within an organization, create pods, if you will, or cohorts, where they come together and we share whatever's going on, what are our concerns. So you can break it down into smaller units without having to go to London, to Las Vegas to wherever it is that what you are going to have. So I think that's one of the things that is possible. I'm more concerned if I look at what's going on now in a business environment,
Mm-hmm.
is that we really look at our role in a larger world, not just what's happening to me here.
Mm-hmm.
This is my bias. My bias is that I am not a citizen of the United States. I'm a citizen of the world. And if I'm a citizen of the world, then I need to open myself to what are the opportunities and what are the challenges in this planet, which we either come together or fall apart. And so I think one of the important things for business is not only to look at what's in front of me, but how do I begin to look at what is my influence in the greater world around me?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a really thought-provoking message there in terms of we are all global citizens at the end of the day. We all live on the same planet, and albeit we are separated by land masses, yourself being in the US, myself being in the UK, that doesn't mean we're any different. And the mere fact that we're able to have a conversation, and that's the beauty of technology right now, we're able to have this conversation and we're able to connect in a way that maybe was not possible as frequently as maybe it could have been. I would have had to get on a plane and come and travel, or it would have been the other way around. So I guess there's an opportunity there for you to be able to foster new relationships outside of your immediate vicinity. However, I do think it's a really interesting point you mentioned there with, in terms of a business landscape, the virtual side of things is something that needs to be navigated in the right way. In terms of kind of, this question follows on from that, what strategies can be employed to improve communication in a virtual and remote environment in terms of for businesses? What do you think?
Okay, so let me make sure I understand the question.
Yeah, sure.
So your question is, within a virtual landscape, what can be done to improve communications? Is that what I understand?
Exactly that.
And by the
My
way,
apologies for the
no, no,
pause.
no, no. See, what this says is that did I hear right?
Yeah,
Listening to you. And I need to give you feedback on what I think I heard, because I could have heard it wrong. And if I heard it wrong, then I'm going to head in the wrong direction. I think people can be taught to be good virtual communicators if they're willing. I think that if you have a good, solid facilitator, which sometimes I would be called upon to do, so you see these people in this landscape. I also think let me backtrack for a second. I've given programs in which we went across the world, so I was at one time zone, so speaking at one time, so that I could get the Asia market, another time zone so that I could get Europe, which means I'm the one that's going to be in the wacky time zone. And that's great. And because I didn't have the authority, I couldn't say, now that you've listened to each other, you're sitting here in the Asia Pacific, go back and look at the people who you know. How do you create, I'll call it a cohort again, that says, what is it that we got out of that? How can we expand upon that? What are the questions we still have? And what do we bring to the party? So that's the other thing. Sometimes I think when you have a virtual presentation, you think the person doing it is the one who has the answers. No, 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 no. I always say wisdom never resides on the stage. It is within that platform. And so one of the opportunities in a virtual platform, which you don't have when you have this massive audience, is to be able to draw out the wisdom from other people. And that's how we learn, and that's how we create those connections.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. And I had a conversation with quite a successful entrepreneur earlier today, actually. And he said that when he's part of a group, and in that group, they don't ever give advice. They only share experiences. I thought it was really profound in the sense that you learn more from your own experiences than being told what to do by someone else. And so when you can share the experiences that you have, I think it's really, and if you have great experiences, difficult experiences, you learn from your losses, you learn from your wins, you're able to share really useful information. And I think that the point you mentioned there with wisdom is a really great point in the fact that wisdom isn't always on the stage, it's within everyone else, right? Everyone's got their own experiences, everyone's had their own experiences, everyone's learned something along the way. And so if you can drag that out of people, then you get the opportunity to be able to help others learn different things. And that's yeah.
Well, what I love about what you just said and talking about whoever it was that you were interviewing and how they give each other experiences, I would go one step deeper.
Mm.
And if I shared with you what my experience is, the question that I would ask of the people who heard it is, what does this tell you? What would you learn and take away from this? Because I could have one experience and say, this was my learning, but somebody else is sitting there and saying, oh, I got that, but here's what I would take away from it. Here's what I would learn. And so you go even one step deeper. And there we create closer communication.
And I think that's a really great point. And I actually think back to my own life and my brother, for example. And I think that, like, we grew up together and we experienced so many things at the same time. But often we'd leave situations with different lessons. And it's so true in the sense that different people will take different things from different experiences.
Yeah. You know, the fact that you said it was your family. So I have a twin brother and I have a baby sister, 3 years younger. We all had the same families. We all had the same parents, but we had different experiences with those parents. And how we experienced each other. And what did we take away from it? Like, my baby sister is my wisdom model. She knows a heck of a lot more than I do. Just because she's my baby sister, she ain't no baby. And so I'm constantly learning from her. And my twin brother, we're twins, and yet we're unique individuals, and we learn from each other, those experiences.
Couldn't agree more with you there, Eileen. In terms of then, you're a coach, as well as amongst other things, many other things. How do you coach someone to be a better communicator, not just from a listening standpoint, but from an actual speaking standpoint? If there's someone out there that doesn't have necessarily the strongest amount of confidence within them to communicate what they're thinking, how do you coach someone to improve in that way?
Okay, I hear two questions there.
Yeah.
One is about speaking on a platform. The other one I think I hear is on a more intimate basis, how do you coach someone to be a more effective communicator?
Yes, exactly that.
Did I see two things? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's take the one on the stage first. What's interesting is speaking in public is the number one fear. Dying is number two. Of course, I always said my fear would be dying on the stage. No. So to assist people in being better public speakers, it's a learning curve. It's both developing the confidence and knowing the content. If you don't know the content, you're nailed. You can't do it. So that's one kind of coaching over there. And the more someone does it, the more confident they can be. So, for example, if I threw you in a swimming pool and I said, Saeed, I want you to do the butterfly stroke. And you go, I don't know. What's the butterfly stroke? Well, let's go like this. And so you'd be really clumsy at first, and then eventually you would get better. Or you'd say, you know what? Give me the freestyle. Let me do the freestyle. I'll do that. I don't want to do the butterfly. So I think at some point in time we also have to say what makes sense for us. The other one, which is, how do we become better communicators on a smaller base? I have a dear friend, Marcia Reynolds, Dr. Marcia Reynolds. She is a former chair of the International Coaching Federation. She's beyond brilliant. One of her books, which I love the title, is Coach the Person, Not the Problem.
Love it. Absolutely.
So you think about what that means. Coach the person, not the problem. So instead of dealing, what's the thing you're trying to talk about, is you begin to say to the person, what is it you think that you're feeling that you can't express right now? What would allow you to state it in a way in which you feel comfortable? And again, I'm making up, because until you're with the person, I have no idea what it is. But you coach the person and not the problem. So you don't provide answers as much as offer questions that allow the individual to think deeper and answer them. That makes sense?
Yeah, no, it makes absolute sense, and it's again a really interesting point. You don't tackle the problem itself. Often, it's the feeling someone has of the problem that is the obstacle, and when you can overcome that obstacle, then the problem looks smaller. And so, I think that's it's a really great point. In terms of, I guess, what are the key components of developing, and this is more of in a business environment, what are the key components in developing a high performing team that knows how to work together, that knows how to communicate, that is strong in a collaborative sense when it comes to communicating? What are your thoughts on that?
So if I look back on the different experiences I've had with management teams, and part of it is, how do we become high performing? What gets in our way? I've always started with, so let's pretend you have, I'll make it up, 20 people in a room, and we're going to be together for 2.5 days.
Hmm.
And the person who owns the meeting, the head person, what is it you're looking as an outcome? Because we have to drive to something. You can't just sit there. And so this is how I handle this. Let's say there are 20 people. I interview all 20 people and I ask them the same question. What is it you want people to understand about the role that you play? What do you think about XYZ, which whatever has brought us together? And then what I do is when I heard all 20, the same question, that's from the top to whoever's the next, down how far we go. Then I take their responses and I create a position paper. And when I say a position paper, it's a 3x5 card. And what I look is what are the common themes in that question that come out. The reason I do this is, and you've been there, I'm sure, Saeed, where you're in a meeting and somebody is, they want to talk about this. I want to talk about this, and this is the problem. And nobody else wants to talk about it. I'm not going to waste somebody's time talking about this because it's one person's issue. So this way, it also makes it a third party. So I don't have to say, you said this, he said this. This is, quote, the issue. Okay, so I might have a series of those, my 3x5 cards. But before we ever start, Saeed, I want them to understand who are the individuals that sit around the table. Not your title, not whatever, but who sits around the table. And so I can get at that in many ways. There is an assessment I can use called the DISC, which shows people what in the current way is your communication style, which opens up a lot of windows. Because all of a sudden I had somebody say, you know what, I come in and I want to talk about blah, blah, blah before I get to the issue. And the person I'm talking to over here, just give me the facts, just give me the facts. So we all write just in how, the content. So that's one way. But I also want to comment, who is the person? So one of the last times I did this, I asked all of my participants, I said, here's the three things. What is your favorite song? Tell me what your favorite song is. Number 2, I want you to send me a picture of yourself as a teen or a toddler. And the third thing is, if you could be anything in the world that you wanted to be, what would that be? So let's say, Saeed, I would have 3 things for you. Give me, what's one of your favorite songs? Give me a song.
Oh, you put me on the spot here.
I did.
Let's say it's a big one. It's on camera, so I have to be. It has to be.
You don't
My
need to
favorite
lie.
song, "Karma Chameleon" by Culture Club.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right. That's your music. That's what you like.
it's a classic '80s. Yeah.
Okay, classic 80s. All right, so we'll pick something out. Okay, so what I would do with each one of those, I create a playlist.
Hmm.
And so throughout the course of those 2 days, I would play a song, just the start of it, and everybody's listening said, okay, whose favorite song is this? The first song, this just cracked me up. This was with a global pharmaceutical company, and the very first song was a head song from the 60s. So it was like one of these hard rocker. It turned out the person whose favorite song that was the only attorney in the group, who everybody saw as just like this. It was like, there's another side to this person.
Mm.
And then throughout the course of the time, I would flip up a picture, and it would be one of the pictures that someone had sent me, either a teen or a toddler. The reason I asked them for that is we were all teens or toddlers. It's what we have in common. So all of a sudden I see this little kid, on a bearskin rug, with this little tokas hanging out. And you say, who is it? Turned out it was the head guy. And so you suddenly see somebody in another frame. And then when I say, what do you, if you could be anything? So I put one of those up throughout the course of time, and people say, God, who is that? Well, why would you want to be that? And what I did, number one, it broke down barriers. And I began to see people. So we're going to talk about the issues. Yeah, we're going to do this. But suddenly the conversations take a more human. Granted, the person whose meeting this was amazing. He's one of the best. He's one of the best leaders I've ever worked with, and we've done many things together. And he trusted me that I wasn't going to take him off on some weird kind of thing. But he was such a great role model for how you allow this group to develop. And yes, we came out with what the issues were. And yes, and one of the things in this group that we did this in New York, that it took all of us to go see Wicked, the show Wicked. And in one of the songs in the show Wicked is I'm Better for Having Known You. And so when we had the close, I played that music and I said, just go to your friends and say, what is it that you're better because you know them? They left on a whole different way than when they came in, and more committed to what it was as a group they wanted to create. And it's because, Saeed, we didn't just attack an issue. We walked around it as human beings who've been teens, toddlers, like music, don't like music, what do we want to be? And so it broke down those barriers. What do you think?
I think that's fantastic. I think it's a really great exercise. I love that exercise that you spoke about. I think one of the easiest ways to understand someone is just looking at their music taste, right? And just being able to resonate with them, but not just that, and understanding that everyone is the same. Everyone's got their own things, and they've got their own different sizes. And it's really interesting you mentioned there the fact that one person in that group that everyone thought was, who is this guy? And after they heard the music, they're like, it's a different side to him. And I think the point you mentioned there, being able to create good relationships with people means that you have to understand people. And so when you can understand where someone is, why someone is the way they are, you have a better chance of having a better relationship and having a better chance of having better communication.
And I think that's true. Now, let's also add a caveat.
Yeah.
We can't do this with everybody.
Yeah.
Seriously, there are some people who, I'll use a phrase called drink the Kool-Aid, which means that you bought the whole thing. Nothing's going to change you. This is the way it is, blah, blah, blah. And so I accept that, but it might be that we move in different directions. I mean, and I have had, this happened actually at two different places, that the person who was one of the people, that was part of the team, it really became apparent that they were more dysfunctional in that team than functional. And so it's up for the person who's the head person of that group anyway, to decide how you want to handle that. And it's interesting because there were some role changes because of that. So I don't want to be a Pollyanna. This is not, you can't quote, we are the world, we are. It's just, there's going to be some of those hard knocks, and you have to figure out, how do we work around it? But if we don't try, we won't get anywhere.
And on the topic of hard knocks, let's talk about resiliency. And you yourself are an expert in resiliency and building resiliency. You have a real understanding over the years that you've been consulting and speaking on the topic. And you mentioned yourself, one of the things that when you started off was 9/11. And the resiliency that was required post 9/11. Talk to me about resiliency. Why is it important for individuals to be resilient, and what can people do to become more resilient?
Okay, so let me backtrack for 1 minute and let me define resilience, because I talk about radical resilience, and I call it radical because in everything I pick up so far, my approach is radical. It's different. Because what I say is resilience is not what the dictionary says. And if I ask people, what does it mean to be resilient? They'll tell me it means what? You tell me, what's resilience mean?
strength, stoicism, being
Stoicism, bounce back, right? And
yeah.
the dictionary says it's an object under stress that when deformed and the stress goes away, it comes back. And is always in the context of something bad. It's hard, it's terrible, and how are we going to come back? All right, here's a couple things. Number one, that's fine if you're a piece of steel or a willow tree. Human beings do not go back. You are different today, Saeed, than you were 2 weeks ago. Small ways, maybe in large ways. So there's no such thing as going back. Secondly, using that definition, it implies that you only need resilience when things are terrible and we have to be strong. I define resiliency as the ability to grow through. So it's growth. To grow through challenge or opportunity so you end up wiser, smarter on the other side. Ultimately, resilience is about energy management. Do I have the mental, emotional, physical energy, the capacity to grow through so I can end up where I want to be on the other side? So you might be given a phenomenal opportunity. I mean, maybe that's what you've got right now. And it takes a lot of energy to create these podcasts. It takes a lot of energy to figure out how I'm going to divide it. That's energy. So it's an opportunity. So how is it that I grow with energy? What is my energy component? How do I increase it? What takes it away? How do I work on it? If you think about where is energy in our bodies? You tell me.
I would say in your core.
In your core.
Yeah.
That's right. In your core. And the core are in your muscles. That's where the energy is. So if you think of it like a muscle, when I want to grow that muscle, I don't pick up 100-pound weight. I'll start with 5 pounds, and then 10, and then 15. And at some point in time, I can't go past 30. That's just, that's the best that I can do. So if I look at it as being a muscle, how do I strengthen that muscle? How do I keep that muscle? Because people have different capacities. How do I keep that muscle? And what is it that takes the energy away from that muscle called resilience? And you said, why is it important? It's because the world is crazy. Stuff happens. I mean, look at this. There's always stuff, good and not good. And it's going to require energy. I'll use this as an example right now. I live just south of Los Angeles that is still experiencing this horrific firestorm. For everyone involved in that, from the first responders that are out there trying to fight this thing, to the families that have been evacuated that don't know where the heck they're going to go, that requires a tremendous amount of resilience. And 5 years from now, resilience is going to be required to say, how do we rebuild? And not build differently, so we don't build on slopes, so we don't let the brush burn. So there's all kinds of learnings that are there. So we are constantly looking at, how organizational shifts, climatic shifts, all of it requires energy and ability to grow. If I go backwards, build the house in the same way I've always done it, on the hillside, let all that vegetation grow up, guess what? It can happen again. So that's a really wonderful metaphor, actually, for resiliency.
Absolutely. I also love how you brought together resilience being an actual muscle. I think that's a really great way to, because, for example, you go to the gym, you work out, but if you stop working out for a week, a month, 2 months, that muscle goes in fatigue, it becomes smaller, it's not as strong anymore, and you're no longer growing, you're no longer looking at those opportunities. And I think that's a really interesting point that you've mentioned there, as well as the example of what's happening in California at the moment. In South California, it's devastating. In terms of as business develops in this post-pandemic world that we live in right now, how has the competitive landscape evolved for you and your business when it comes to speaking to organizations and businesses and developing? I guess my question is there a real lack of communicative skills going on in now more than ever in the different generations, or is it simply same?
Well, if I were a magician and I could go to these different age groups, I probably could tell you more effectively. What I see right now, and I don't know what format it will take, but the use of artificial intelligence as a way of communicating. I could go to ChatGPT and say, write me a 100-page essay about blah, 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 blah. Doesn't mean I know it. It means I know how to use ChatGPT. And there are wonderful things that we can do with AI. There also is a caution, and I think the younger generation loves this, but there's a caution, is that I let this thing, this artificial thing, take over this individualistic thing. So if I think of artificial intelligence, there's also authentic intelligence in AI.
I love that.
So what really is authentic about our communication? I mean, I think right now I see organizations hiring people who will talk about, here are things you have to understand, blah, blah, blah. It's great, it's wonderful. When do we get to be authentic instead of using this thing? Let's see it as a tool, but not as the end result. And how do I take that tool and allow it to speak authentically in my voice?
Very interesting, and I love that AI being an artificial intelligence, authentic intelligence. It's a really interesting point, and I think AI is really a massive topic of conversation right now, isn't it? It's that striking that balance of, are we taking too much away from the human ability, or are we handicapping our ability to do more? So, for example, I remember when we call it in the UK TomToms or satellite navigation when it first came out, and I remember. At first we were like, they're driving people into the sea and things like that. And it was because people were no longer using their brains anymore. They were just following a computer that was said. And I feel like that there's a resonance there with authentic intelligence versus artificial intelligence, in the sense that we can write that essay, that 1,000-word essay. It doesn't mean we know it. And once upon a time, taxi drivers used to, especially in the UK, in London, the black cab drivers used to be able to, they knew every single road off by memory. They had to do an exam to memorize everything. Are we losing the ability to work our brain a little bit more and be more human in going, okay, my brain can do this? Or are we alleviating a lot of those the brain power that we're using so we can try and think bigger and work bigger? I think it's a really interesting question, and on that
Question.
yeah,
I don't, and I've read about the taxi cab drivers of London, which is a very confusing city to begin with.
Absolutely.
And they know. That's why I would always go on the tube. I would never do anything else. It's just like, nah. So if I don't have an answer, the answer.
I don't think anyone does at the moment.
Let me just give you some of my current thoughts as I think about me. One of the things I've noticed is when I become dependent upon that map that's in the front of my car, I could no longer tell you what street I turned down. I don't remember it. It's not there. Now, maybe it's not important. Might it be important? But when someone says on your cell phone, give me directions to blah, blah, I don't remember. I don't know. It was a street, and I remember it. I just depended upon my GPS. It's in my car to show me how to get there. Is that good or bad? I don't know.
Exactly.
I think anytime there is some breakthrough in technology, there's fabulous, positive things about it. And there are drawbacks. And it's a willingness to talk at both of them. At the end of the day, for me, are we operating as human beings and not as robots?
That's the age-old question, isn't it? We're human beings at the end of it. If we have the additional element of robots helping us, how much should they help us? How much should we be human? Such a complex question. We probably don't have enough time to be digging in any deeper.
I don't have the answer either.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. So in this section of the podcast, what we like to do is we call it the entrepreneur's room. And so what we do is we ask the entrepreneurs that we speak with a few questions consistent with every one of them, just to hear what they have to say. And the first question I like to ask in this segment of the podcast is, how are you currently spending your days as the leader of your business?
Oh, well, that's a very good question, because it depends on what day of the week it is.
Yeah.
Like today, I knew I had to carve out an hour so that I could speak to you. So it depends on, it depends on what is on that calendar. That's interesting because every day is different. I've never been bored a day in my life, ever. Even as a little kid, I was never bored. There's nothing to do. There's always stuff to do, which is why I have to be careful because I can become a human doing instead of a human being. I just do instead of be. So how do I manage that is I am on email a lot. I check through all the email. Right now there's a lot of email that's coming that basically are things that I'm reading related to what's going on right now in my country.
Mm-hmm.
Opinion pieces so that I stay abreast with the world that I inhabit. So I do that. I write. I give it to my virtual assistant. I do have a virtual assistant. I think that's great. By the way, we do get together once a month. She virtual. She comes and I cook her breakfast. We go from there. But I write. She goes through and edits it, make sure grammar, whatever, and then we post it. I post on LinkedIn. I post on Facebook. I have a blog and I have a monthly newsletter that goes out, which people can subscribe to. So I do spend a lot of time writing. And I also spend time reading. Not as much as I would like, but again, I believe for me, learning is a constant thing. And I see myself as a modern elder. And as a modern elder, that means I'm a wisdom worker. There is wisdom I have to share. At the same time, it's not set in concrete. So one of the things I've challenged myself to do this over the last 3 years is I have to do things I've never done before every month. I don't care whether it's taking a Pilates class or whether it's learning to play pickleball or eating a raw oyster, whatever it is. And it's one of the things that I think if all of us would do this, try something you've never done before, you also build the resiliency muscle. Because look what else I did. I can do that. I can do this. So, and then of course with clients, it's whatever that client wants. So I can be in conversations with clients. We can be designing a program for them, talking to another one of the presenters. So I see how we can weave information together. So no day is ever the same with the exception that the 3 things that I do. I get up and have coffee. And when I'm having my coffee, I meditate every day. Then I go for a 6-mile run because if my body doesn't work, my head doesn't work. And then the third thing is I go through and look at what are the emails that have come and things that I need to respond to immediately. And then I can get back into what's on my agenda for today, like having a wonderful conversation with you.
Love it. Appreciate that. Yeah, no, I love asking that question just to understand how leaders and business owners think and what they do. And you'll be surprised at how consistent the message is when it comes to that question. In terms of then the business as a whole, as a business owner, what are the most important metrics for your business? What do you look at?
That's another hard question because over time it's changed.
Yeah.
Because I have changed.
Yeah.
So initially, what I counted were the number of days on a calendar that I was out speaking. More days, the better it was. So you're looking at the bottom line. You're looking at what's going in. Now, over time, I don't look at the number of days anymore. What I look at as a metric is how am I feeling about what I just did. And where's my next avenue of growth, which I think is really important. So for me, the metric is probably be how am I growing? What is the wisdom I'm seeking so that I can share it out? That would be a metric. So I track down every book that I read. I write it. I have a journal. Every month I write down what are the books that I read, what are the books that I read. And some of them will be fiction. Most of them are nonfiction. And what did I learn? And what did I try that I'd never done before? That to me is a metric.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a form of self-development, isn't it? In making sure that you're building yourself up to be able to grow and be resilient, right? Couple more questions, then we'll be done today. But what have you tried before and what didn't work? What are the biggest lessons you've learned?
Jeez.
And if there's a lot, then we can do top 2 then.
Okay, I don't know why this, because one of the first metrics, when you're starting your business is, profit and loss.
Yeah.
You look at the balance sheet. What are you doing? And I was asked to speak to this, actually it was an international group They had brought them to the States, and it was a meeting. And the person who asked me had heard me do a program that I do on surviving and thriving with difficult people. Walk this way, talk this way. It's a hardcore training thing. And he said, would you come and do this for our company when we bring everyone in? I said, sure. Well, he offered me a very nice fee. Well, I looked at I could use that. Okay, I'll say yes. Then I found out that when they wanted me to speak was at the end of a dinner. I said yes because I looked at the bottom line. I didn't think this thing through. So here I am speaking on how to survive with difficult people. And I am talking to people. They had an open bar before it started. Then they served wine at dinner. Then the CEO got up and talked for God knows how long. And then all of a sudden, blah, blah, blah. Here's Eileen McDargh. I got to tell you, they could have cared less. And I said yes wrongly because I looked at the wrong metric. I looked at how much money I was going to pay instead of saying, is this a spot for me? That was such a huge lesson for me. Ever since then, if someone says, no, you after dinner speaker, you need someone who's an entertainer or a comedian or whatever. I'm funny, we can have fun, but no, I will not do it. So my big lesson was not to let the metric control what I say yes and no to. And I have turned down dates. I have fired clients because it wasn't a fit. I'm not right for you. I need you to go someplace else.
I think that's a really important lesson as well. And often, especially if you're early on in your business career, you say yes to everything, right? But yes isn't always the right answer. And then we're very similar in that we don't work with just anyone. We work with the right type of people and the right type of clients, because what we realize from our experiences is you work with the wrong people, you work with the wrong clients, no one wins. No one wins in that relationship. We don't get what we were looking to get in terms of helping our clients grow, and they don't get what they wanted to get, which was the same thing or whatever it might be. So 100%, I couldn't agree more with that, and it's a great lesson. Last question before I leave you today. If you had a magic wand to solve one business problem, what would that one business problem be?
Jeez. Is this for the business world globally? Is it just for me? Just general business?
Just whatever you would solve.
Wow. A magic wand. Man, that's a hard question.
Yeah, everyone says it. It's a tough one. It's a really tough one.
It really is. If I could solve one.
It might be easier if it's for yourself.
Obviously, supply chain is a big problem. But I think one of the business problems is some of the decisions that are made to help the people at the top. They don't help anybody going down. So I think if I could solve a business problem, it would be to look at your process all the way through, and is everybody coming out somehow better because of that? If it's only these 5 people who sit in the boardroom and everybody else is screwed, you didn't do it. Oh, you'll be fine. But you didn't help the people going down. And the other, if I could wave a magic wand, would be, how do you want to be remembered, Mr. Business Person?
Legacy.
And I ask that because my sister's chair of the board of United World College, Costa Rica. UWC is a global educational concept that started after World War II from a Scottish instructor, a Scottish educator, and a World War II general. And they said, how do we make sure that we never have a World War III? And the educational philosophy that they created, and there are over 18 now campuses around the world, is say, how do we get people to live together in community and understand each other? And so at UWC Costa Rica, there are 200 and some odd junior, we call them junior, senior high school. You would call them a college, and then when you go to university, what we call college is, it's university. These 200 plus students who represent for us junior, senior, high school, come from 66 countries. These kids have come, and many of them are on scholarship. I mean, they can come from the Sudan, from Uzbekistan, from Brazil. It doesn't matter. And their whole intention of that system is to teach not only academic skills, but skills related to sustainability, created to global issues, They come out with a far greater degree than I ever would have. They get it's called I'll say it wrong. It's a UB. It's a higher form of degree than what I got when I went to junior senior high school. It was useless for me. So if I could do a business problem, it would how could we create more and more United World Colleges that allowed us to come and live in community, and how do we develop the world there?
That's great.
That's it is possible. That's what's the good thing.
Yeah, it's been done before. If it's been done before, then it is possible.
There are campuses in the U.S. It's one in New Mexico. This one in Costa Rica. There's one in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Obviously, outside of in Canada, they're Singapore. They're all over the place. But it's a great philosophy.
Yeah, it really is. I think that's a great place to end it today. Eileen, that was a really great conversation. I really appreciate the time you spent today, and thank you very much for sharing your time and sharing your insights. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you. It's my joy.
Thank you. All right then.